Well, welcome back to Apologetics 101. And we have some great videos tonight for you again to bolster your notes. So what you see in your notes, and you should be about on page 25-ish along there, page 30. If for your homework, you will carry your study on to about page 32 in your notes, then we'll be moving along so that when it's time for me to actually get to what's called the classical evidences, which are the 7 converging evidences for the existence of God. We'll get into C.S. Lewis. We'll be getting into things like that, and have some videos, by the way, on C.S. Lewis also. A homework assignment from last week, I had asked you, this is a repetition, so hopefully you'll have this under your belt to help us with our biblical studies portion, which will be about lesson number 7. But if you have this under your belt, you will already be along the way. And if you will write this down, watch the YouTube. So you simply Google in YouTube debate 163, James White. It's a debate. He picks up at minute 30, approximately 30 minutes each. And that's a very good presentation of what we have with the Bible. What is the Bible? I had put in my notes to you to have somewhere along the lines, if you could get F.F. Bruce's book, The New Testament Documents, Are They Reliable? But if you'll simply watch that debate, you can save the money. I found that often these are quick presentations that are very, very informative and impactful. So again, that is YouTube Debate 163, James White, Dr. White. You will not, I've watched a number of times, and I keep watching. It's wonderful. Also, please add on to this, I want to start immersing you into John Lennox. If you haven't seen or heard of John Lennox, the double PhD Oxford mathematician, you need to be, he's, I think, as important as C.S. Lewis. So you would Google, again, YouTube, debate 116. Debate. Now, this is not a visual, this is an audio, but he's debating Lawrence Krauss, the PhD, basically the book that Krauss wrote, given the fact that there was a creation. We know that. Krauss came along and said, well, I think you could get a creation out of nothing, hence the name of the book, The Universe Out of Nothing. And that's a fairly lively, interesting debate on the definition of nothing. Think about that. That is YouTube Debate 116, John Lennox v. Krauss, Krauss. So please write those down, and that's not in the page 3, 4, and 5 of your compendium of stuff. What I am trying to do is get you to the place, listen carefully, I'm trying to get you to the place where you are adept at seeing what YouTubes may be applicable to whatever situation you may face. And I'm talking now to the Christian who's trying to fortify their own minds or to convince somebody to really take this issue of God and his existence seriously. I'm not asking you to memorize everything. What I'm asking you to do is get a grasp of it and then have your sources. That's on page 3, 4, and 5 of your notes, but that's just the beginning. These 2 things that I just gave you aren't in the notes. So you add those on, and hopefully you will be calling me and sending me emails. David, you need to take a look at this YouTube. This is absolutely fantastic. It just popped up another great debate with so-and-so, and I will add that onto the note presentation. So good interaction there. Next time we're going to be, today we're on evolution. Next week we will be on a refined portion of that study of evolution, the Cambrian explosion. A wonderful video I have. Now, I could just give you verbals about all this, and that would be okay, but let me tell you what. Me saying it is one thing. You've seen it in visual form from experts is something else. Remember the style in which we're trying to do this. I'm presenting this as a lawyer in the form of the presentation to someone, whether it be a soft skeptic or a hardcore skeptic like I used to be. I'm trying to present this as an evidentiary group or settings of material that you would present to a jury. Here's an evidence. Here's an evidence, trying to get you to that magic word that I have used over and over again that you would see in a courtroom setting. We get you to the point of preponderance. That is, there's more evidence in favor of than negative. And if I can get you there, where that skeptic, whoever the skeptic is, it might be your own mind. It doesn't have to be just somebody, could be just you. Then that gets you to that place where you're taking this. I think I'm well past, with these three things we've discussed, well past preponderance and something we call clear and convincing, which is weighted very heavily. I mean, that's getting you pretty far along. Quickly, what have we discussed already? The first week we discussed that there really is a creation. We showed videos of that. That is the contemporary scientific assessment of where we are. Absolutely, there was a creation, and the steady state theory is gone. Now, you all should have that down pat by now, because it's the fourth time we've been over. It's in your notes. You should be comfortable with these concepts at this point. If you've been doing your homework, yeah, do your head like that, yeah. Do your homework. The evidence, therefore, on the creation is that this implication, if there really was a creator, no steady state theory, it's gone, is what? That there is a God. How do you get a creation without the clear implication being there that there is a God? Number two, fine-tuning is a reality, and we showed the videos about fine-tuning. Atheist physicists prove God. Remember that? The simple 4 words, that's in your notes. We saw that video, a powerful video of what the fine-tuning concept is. Please make sure you've got that. You're going to miss a lot if you miss that idea. And then third, the idea of what is our positioning literally in the cosmos itself as a planet, that we who are most capable of being able to comprehend these truths about reality and God and the nature of the universe are so positioned in our solar system and in our own galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, that we can actually see and comprehend everything that's presented to us, so that the creatures, the entities that are most capable of, probably the only ones in the cosmos, by the way, maybe we're the only ones for reasons we looked at last week. But if you see these full videos on we're having to cut this. For instance, the one we're starting with on evolution, the second one we'll be going to, which is Dr. Werner's, has a wonderful setup, but it's 12 minutes long. I'm sorry, it takes us past our deadline where I become, what do I turn into? A pumpkin. I turn into a pumpkin at 6 o'clock. So we have to end at 6 o'clock, and at this point I have to actually cut off. So these three things we have already discussed, these are cosmological kind of ideas. Now, these are powerful concepts. These are powerful arguments. Now we go into, let's look at evolution. So it's like microscopic ideas. Now, number one is going to be, that we will look at but later, but I want you to think about, is how did life begin? From non-material, from non-life, that is from non-organic to organic. That's called the origin of life problem. Origin of life problem. And they've had a horrible time trying to figure that out. They haven't figured it out. Next issue is the issue of complexity, particularly DNA. We'll be looking at that next week. DNA and how packed with information that is. And then we finally get to what's the status of evolution today. And you're going to hear now, I will call as my first witness this afternoon, to put this again in the legal context. My first witness, Your Honor, I call to the stand Dr. David Berlinski. And then I would question Dr. Berlinski, tell us, Dr. Berlinski, how many doctorates do you have? And he will give that to you. 5 minutes of David Berlinski. He is brilliant. There are more expansive David Berlinski videos that are up. We only have time for 5 minutes. This one is Evolution Destroyed in Less Than 5 Minutes. That's the name of it. So if you want to YouTube and get it, Evolution Destroyed in Less Than 5 Minutes. He mentions 4 points, his first being the problem with the evolution record, not just the Cambrian, but overall. Listen for it and see if you can find it. Now, a little test question. The fourth issue is going to be something that he doesn't say, and number 4 is. See if you can spot it. David Berlinski comes to the stand.
It's tough to say because we're not dealing with a theory in any sense in which, say, a physicist would recognize the theory. We're dealing with a collection of anecdotes, a certain point of view, a series of hunches. I would say that the most outstanding, the salient points are, first of all, the fossil record, which is simply mystifying. We can't make much sense of the fossil record. It does not sustain any kind of Darwinian prediction that can be intelligently derived from Darwinian theory, and it doesn't seem to sustain anything else as far as I can see. It's a perfectly mystifying record. That's one obvious point. I'm not talking just about the Cambrian explosion. I'm talking about everything that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the fossil record. Second point, we have never been able in any way theoretically to examine the central Darwinian claim that natural selection and random variation can account for a great deal of complexity. If you look at the history of physics, for example, what did Newton do in the 17th century? He said, well, the planets are being attracted to the sun by a force. It's not any kind of force, it's a inverse square force. And then he went and showed that if you make that assumption, the result will be an orbit that conforms exactly to the observed orbit, say, of the Earth or of Mars. It will be a conic section. And then he proved the converse, that if it's a conic section, the planets must be attracted to a central source by an inverse square law. There is nothing like that in biology, in Darwinian theory. A kind of a canonical demonstration that this mechanism, random variation, natural selection, is adequate to the generation of this level of complexity. From the point of view of the serious sciences, without that kind of a demonstration, one is completely adrift. You have no idea whether the mechanism is adequate for its intended purposes. This is the second point. Third evidential piece of the puzzle. Look, you turn to the serious sciences, you turn to general relativity or quantum mechanics. I can program a computer with the equations of general relativity or with the equations of quantum mechanics, and I can say, all right, what are the consequences? I can actually see the consequences emerge in a simulation. We can't do any of this in biology. And that should prompt any reasonable person to ask, why not? If this is such a simple mechanism, which could easily be programmed on a computer, how come we can't set up a computer and create something of biological-like complexity? How come we cannot see the unfolding of an evolutionary process the way we can see the unfolding of an evolutionary process in physics? This is a very serious question. I've looked at all the genetic algorithms. I'm trying to write a genetic algorithm myself. And the sheer fact is, without a tremendous amount of very special manipulation and ad hoc constraints, the computer is not going to generate anything realistic if it uses Darwinian mechanisms, and it will generate something realistic only if it doesn't use Darwinian mechanisms. This is an important point. 50 years after the computer revolution began, we have a splendid tool for assessing the intelligibility and viability of Darwinian theory. And everything that we know, and I think this is the uniform experience of anyone working in genetic algorithms, indicates these mechanisms will not work. They will not work for their intended purposes. And finally, there's the utter absence of laboratory evidence. I mean, random variation, natural selection, we should be able to start manipulating organisms. When we look at dogs, no matter how far back we go, it's dogs. When we look at bacteria, no matter what we do, they stay bugs. They don't change in their fundamental nature. There seems to be some sort of an inherent species limitation, and we have no good explanation for this in terms of Darwinian theory. We should have far more flexibility, far more plasticity under laboratory conditions than we actually do if Darwinian theory or anything like that were correct. What we see in nature, what we see in the laboratory, is very highly bounded variation, cyclic variation, as for example, finch beaks in the Galapagos Island. That's about all we see. Small variations. Why is that if Darwinian theory is correct? These are evidentiary points that I think need to be stressed, need to be examined openly, honestly. And they never are, of course. Never are.
Our next witness is going to be Dr. Carl Werner, MD, who spent 2 years studying the lack of transitions in the fossil record. He interviewed 75 paleontologists, went to hundreds of different sites. He produced a marvelous video called Evolution, the Grand Experiment. Evolution, the Grand Experiment. It's available online. You're only seeing a part of it, and we had to cut out a precious first 12 minutes because we just didn't have time to kind of get that in, but it shows you how power-packed the effort was to do this. Okay, portions of Evolution, the Grand Experience by Dr. Werner.
Today, we can learn from the failures of the past. A scientific idea, theory, or law may be believed for thousands of years by a majority of scientists, only to be proven wrong. All scientific theories and laws should be open to scrutiny, even the theory of evolution.
It's not science unless you can question and falsify it. Unless you can say this is false, this is wrong, it's not science.
You know, scientists are just as much prone to holding on to old ideas as anyone else, and many of them are very conservative.
But there's always a chance with new evidence that we may find that there's a fundamental error in our thinking. You know, no scientist ever says never, and no good scientist ever says always.
It comes down to what you bring to the questions to begin with. If you don't want to see things, you're not going to see them. And we're all guilty of not wanting to see certain things.
Carl, you said that one of the three things your friend challenged you about that got this whole experiment started was that there were problems in the fossil record. Could you give me an example of some place where there seems to be a gap or a problem?
These gaps are problematic throughout the fossil record. I'm just going to show you bats here. 1,000 fossil bats have been collected. Now that's a lot of fossils, and these are beautiful fossils. Now if you would have that many fossils, and if evolution was true, you would expect to find ancestors of, let's say, a ground mammal changing into a bat if you have 1,000 fossil bats. But the problem is there's not a single ancestor for any bat. The bats just appear suddenly, almost like it was a creation.
Almost like it was created.
Mm-hmm.
Bats are warm-blooded flying mammals. Some bats use sonar-like echolocation to catch their prey. An amazing 1,000 fossil bats have been collected so far. Many of these are complete bats. Some show breathtaking minute detail, such as wing membranes, fur, and even stomach contents. Despite this rich fossil record, Darwin's predicted intermediates have not been found. There are no fossils showing a ground mammal similar to a mouse, slowly changing into a flying mammal, a bat.
You would guess that there'd be some sort of a bat precursor, but once again, nothing. Bingo, they just show up. And so, as you might guess that, you know, there are certain people that think they were specially created. They actually are kind of a problem with the creationists who like to, you know, if things were created, here's a very highly complex mammal with all these adaptations, and bingo, they just show up at some particular moment in time fully formed as a bat. Obviously, we evolutionary biologists and paleontologists don't believe that, but at this point we don't have a good fossil ancestor for them.
When did bats evolve from the land mammals? When is it theorized?
Well, it's also, that must have happened also in the lowest tertiary, but we have no evidence for this evolution. Also, the bats appear perfectly developed.
We don't have any non-flying bats, and so we can't pull something out of that, any kind of information out of that tells us how they might have evolved.
What period of time did the bats evolve, do we think?
We have no fossil records of bats during the Cretaceous period, and this means that we are only depending on speculation when it started and what happened in that time. Of course, when we have the oldest bats like Icaronicterus, they were completely developed in their morphology and their flight apparatus, and also the mussel bats were completely developed. So we can only speculate.
Opponents of evolution have seized on this lack of evolutionary intermediates in the fossil record. They ask, how many more bats would have to be collected before one declares the absence of ancestors a reality? For them, the fossil evidence of bats clearly speaks against evolution.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, bats aren't the only animal where we have a problem finding ancestors or transitional forms, isn't it? That's also true with fish.
Fish are yet another example. In fact, the whole fossil record is the same pattern. Let me tell you about fish. They have collected 500,000 fossil fish. 500,000.
That's an awful lot of fossils.
They've collected 100 million invertebrates, you know, animals without backbones, but they can't connect the invertebrates to fish. The fish just suddenly appear.
Scientist John Long is one of Australia's most eminent paleontologists and is the head of science at the prestigious Museum Victoria in Melbourne. He has studied fossil fish for years. He reports that the fossil fish collections of the world are immense.
How many fossil fish are there in museums? Well, I visited some of the biggest museums in the world to study their fossil fish collections, such as the Natural History Museum in London and the American Museum of Natural History. And I'd say conservatively there'd be hundreds of thousands, probably maybe up 500,000.
Although fish have the most abundant fossil record of all the vertebrates, there are no fossils showing invertebrates, such as jellyfish or starfish, slowly changing into fish. Nor do the fossils show the formation of a spinal cord over time, as Darwin predicted.
There's a lot of debate over the origins and diversity of the first jawed fishes, the gnathostomes as we call them. That's still one of the great mysteries and problems to be solved in vertebrate evolution.
Despite a 150-year search for evolutionary ancestors, every fish family appears suddenly in the fossil record.
Every major kind of fish that we know anything about appears fully formed. There's not a trace of an ancestor for any of these creatures, and there are no transitional forms suggesting that these major kind of fishes evolved from a common ancestor. Now, evolutionists know that. They say it is true, but they believe in evolution anyhow. But evolution is impossible. The origin of fishes, that's the origin of vertebrates. That would be the most astounding, important event in all of evolutionary history. We should have book after book after book written about the origin of vertebrates. We should have picture after picture of all these transitional forms. There's nothing. The fact that the vertebrates, the fishes, appear fully formed, no trace of ancestors, no trace of transitional form, destroys the theory of evolution. Evolution cannot be true.
Scientists who support evolution still hold out hope that they will eventually find these fossils.
The evolution of fish is still very much debated amongst paleontologists, and I think that within the next 10 years we'll probably get some resolution on the origin and interrelationships of the major groups of fishes. All we really know at the moment is that the bony fishes came from one of these primitive groups, but we don't really know which one. So there's still mystery and some debate over where the true bony fishes came from.
Scientists who oppose evolution suggest the absence of fish ancestors in the presence of 500,000 fossil fish speaks resoundingly against evolution.
There just aren't any ancestral fossils. We've looked at bats and we've looked at fish. Are there other animal examples?
Yeah, we went and interviewed all of the seal evolution experts in the world, and we said, how many fossil seals have you found? 1,000 fossil seals have been collected. That's a lot of fossils. And then we said, could you show us the animals that evolved from what they think is a skunk went into a seal? Can you show us these transitional fossils? And there are none.
Skunks become seals.
That's what they said.
But there's no fossils to show it.
But no fossils to show it.
Seals are often mistaken for sea lions, but they are an entirely different family of mammals. Unlike sea lions, seals move on the ground like a caterpillar in an undulating pattern. Also, seals do not have visible ears. Evolution scientists believe seals evolved from the skunk and otter family.
Phosid seals are allied to a completely separate group of carnivores, the mustelids, the skunks and otters.
Over 5,000 fossil seals have been identified, but all of the predicted evolutionary ancestors are missing.
We don't have such a material. We already can say this is true seals according to morphology of the bones. We cannot say, I don't know what is this, it has so many features. And it's not a time where we can find this missing link.
According to opponents of evolution, finding 5,000 fossil seals without evolutionary ancestors contradicts the theory of evolution.
So the evolutionists aren't getting any help from the seals. There's no ancestors there either.
No ancestors for seals, no ancestors for bats, no ancestors for fish. It goes on and on and on.
And that's pretty much a pattern through the whole fossil record.
The whole fossil record goes that way, yes.
Now, surely dinosaurs would be the saving proof here because dinosaurs are so key to evolution, right? What about that? Is the opposite true?
You know, most people, when they go through a museum and see all these dinosaurs, they think, oh, this is proof of evolution. But I hold a different view. Are you aware that all of the major animal and plant groups have been found with dinosaurs? In other words, the fauna of the animals with the dinosaurs was similar to today. For example, they found ducks with dinosaurs, flamingos, avocets, hedgehogs, possums. All of the plant groups, all of the animal phyla have been found with dinosaurs. Now, number one, that's a fallacy that the faunas were different. And number two, they don't have ancestors for any of the dinosaur species. They have collected, Don, 100,000 fossil dinosaurs.
That's a huge number.
3,000 of them are full skeletons. And yet, when we interviewed the scientists, they said we do not have a single ancestor for any of the dinosaur species. Nothing.
The idea of dinosaurs roaming our planet seems almost imaginary, but evidence of their existence is undeniable. Some of the plant-eating dinosaurs were over 90 feet long and weighed 30 tons. Meat-eating dinosaurs had huge serrated teeth and powerful jaws that could rip apart any foe. Paleontologists have recovered 3,000 dinosaur skeletons, plus bones and teeth from 100,000 dinosaurs. The remains are so voluminous, they cannot all be displayed, many being relegated to museum basements. Despite this enormous collection of remains, no ancestors have been found for any dinosaur species, even Tyrannosaurus rex.
Wherever we try to put tyrannosaurs in the phylogeny of the branching history of theropod dinosaurs, they have a long missing record. And we're going to find that record one of these days.
We're certainly lacking information that ties together meat-eating dinosaurs and all the rest of the dinosaurs.
Even the plant-eating ornithischian dinosaurs have this same fossil pattern. A plethora of fossils, but no direct ancestors.
We haven't really any idea how the whole other group of dinosaurs called ornithischians, exactly the timing of and the way they branched off. We've got nothing there yet. There's a huge gap.
Despite finding hundreds of skulls for the plant-eating dinosaur Triceratops, no direct evolutionary ancestors have been found.
Triceratops heads are just pretty common. I've heard tell that there are at least 50 different individuals just based on skulls alone, and that's probably complete skulls. And who knows how many partial skulls would increase that number. I suspect we probably know, 100 or hundreds of Triceratops from their skulls.
Many dinosaur evolution charts, such as this one from the Chicago Field Museum, imply that the ancestors of dinosaurs have been discovered. But when the solid lines are overlaid with the actual number of dinosaurs found, the chart tells a very different story. Opponents of evolution suggest these museum diagrams are often misleading and do not reflect the fossil evidence.
Well, today we're going to talk about whales. You've done some groundbreaking work on whales. It's kind of, most people, unless they've really studied this area, don't know that Darwin, in his first edition of Origin of the Species, informed us that whales came from bears, but not just from any bears, from black bears.
Yes, you heard it right. Many people say, did he say bears? Black whales from bears? And yes, Darwin wrote this in the Origin of Species, the first edition, and he almost got laughed out of London. His friend said, what are you talking about, bears going into whales? He says, no, I really believe this. They said, Charles, you're going to lose this whole argument before you get started. You better yank this. And he eventually took it from the Origin of Species, and even though he thought it was correct.
Whales are magnificent creatures, capable of holding their breath for over an hour and diving to over 1,000 feet deep. But where did they come from? Scientists who support evolution suggest whales evolved from a land mammal. For them, the fossil evidence is so convincing, the evolution of whales is offered as one of the best fossil proofs for the theory of evolution. However, scientists who oppose evolution argue that this fossil evidence is unreliable. Darwin thought that whales might have evolved from bears. In The Origin of Species, he wrote, "In North America, the black bear was seen swimming for hours with widely open mouth, thus catching, like a whale, insects in the water. I can see no difficulty in a race of bears being rendered, by natural selection, more and more aquatic in their structure and habits, with larger and larger mouths, till a creature was produced as monstrous as a whale." Modern evolution scientists have abandoned Darwin's idea of a bear evolving into a whale.
So the modern evolutionists have abandoned Darwin's bear-whale theory, but whales are very significant to even the present day evolutionary community, because they believe this is one of the places where they have the best ancestral chart. Is that right?
Yes, they would say the evolution of ground mammal to a whale is the best evidence they have. And I then decided to systematically look into this. And I got the evolution charts for how this evolution would occur. And I started asking questions. The first thing that struck me is, why does everybody have a different animal that evolved into whales? For example, the California Academy of Sciences says it was a hyena that became a whale. A different museum says it was a cougar-like animal that became a whale. Another one says it's a wolf-like mammal. Darwin says it was a bear. That seemed odd. Well, which one was it that became a whale? Then we started to decipher the charts and say, show us the fossils here for this animal. And we realized that the charts reflected something quite different from reality. The scientists actually had created the fins and the tail, the whale's tail, on the animal called Rhodocetus. And we were interviewing him on camera, and this revelation became known. It was stunning.
This is a powerful segment from Evolution, the Grand Experiment. And I just want our folks to look at this, because when they go to a museum and they see these charts, they don't necessarily have to believe everything they read.
Don't believe anything unless you can see the fossils.
Scientists at the University of Michigan suggest whales evolved from this cat-like animal because of the similarities in the teeth, while scientists at the California Academy of Sciences believe this hyena-like animal evolved into a whale because its teeth are similar to some extinct whales. Biologists in Japan suggest whales evolved from a hippopotamus-like animal based on similarities in the DNA. Detractors of the theory ask, if whale evolution is so clear, and if the fossil record is so abundant, why can't evolution scientists agree upon which land mammal changed into a whale? There is great excitement in the scientific community over the discovery of a few important missing links between a land mammal and modern whales.
But what's good about these particular fossil whale specimens is that they do show us intermediates in the evolution of whales. And we don't often get fossil intermediates, so we can actually trace the development of characters. Say, for example, the evolution of swimming in whales. We don't often have that opportunity.
They have a big exhibit on it in Michigan. I was just there. They have all these things just sitting out there. I mean, they're all there. I mean, you really have to be blind or 3 days dead not to see the transition among these. You have to not want to see it.
As shown in this diagram from the University of Michigan Natural History Museum, Ambulocetus is one of the important transitional fossils in whale evolution. It is thought by some to be a walking whale.
Just in the last 5 or 10 years, we've had some remarkable discoveries of fossil whales. And in fact, there have been discoveries that have indicated that fossil whales had feet and actually walked on the land.
Frankly, I don't know why they could call that creature a whale. I have never seen a walking whale, and I've never seen a pig that flies. And they suggested some of these creatures were intermediate. Frankly, I just don't believe it. They believe that because they want to believe it.
Recently, some evolution scientists have backed off the assertion that Ambulocetus was an ancestor of modern whales because its eyes are high up on the head, like an alligator's eyes, quite dissimilar from whales and land mammals.
Ambulocetus may be on a slight sideline, and we think that mostly because it's very strange. It has its eyes raised up on top of its head in a very strange way, and it's unusually large for an early whale. But mostly the eyes up on the top of the head seems like an unusual specialization. Maybe it's not on the main line.
Evolution scientists claim the most spectacular intermediate fossil in whale evolution is Rhodocetus, an animal with 4 legs, a whale's tail called a fluke, and flippers. It would swim using its widened tail fluke like a modern whale, but it had 4 legs like a land mammal. A perfect transitional fossil between land mammals and aquatic mammals, just as Darwin predicted.
The fossil whale that appears a little bit later is Rhodocetus, and this animal had large tail vertebrae that indicate there were lots of room for muscle attachment. So here we see the beginning of the type of locomotion that's characteristic of the modern whale, using just the tail flukes for propulsion and not using the hind limbs.
We have a complete modern whale-type structure in Rhodocetus. There are not many modifications from Rhodocetus to the modern whale other than changes in size of the structures.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rhodocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rhodocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocetus based on the other pieces of anatomy? Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocetus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rhodocetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rhodocetus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies. Opponents of evolution contend that whale evolution is nothing more than hopeful supposition. If museum diagrams are redrawn and corrected for various discrepancies, opponents argue that whale evolution is non-existent.
That's unbelievable, Carl. Absolutely unbelievable that you went to the man who made the drawing, put the flippers and the tail on Rhodocetus, not from any evidence, but from his assumption, and all the other scientists read his things as if it's the gospel truth.
And it collapsed during the interview.
And as soon as you show it's an assumption, there really is no evidence at all.
The whole thing collapsed.
What makes people want to believe or think in the first place that a whale had to come from a land animal?
Well, whales and land mammals are both mammals, or warm-blooded, and so they have thought in the past that maybe a land mammal could become a whale through volition, hoping to get a body part that it needed to swim or whatever, but that life doesn't work that way. The only way you could get a body part for swimming would be by an accident, and it would have to be a monumental accident of letters of DNA, 900 of them, being inserted into the DNA of the reproductive cells. When you look at the odds of this happening, it's unbelievable. Let me just say that.
This goes to a cardinal belief of Darwin's, doesn't it? That that through volition animals could change from one animal to another?
Yes, and Darwin was wrong on this. He was wrong on use, he was wrong on disuse, he was even wrong on the idea of adaptation. Scientists today, biologists who believe in evolution, have rejected this idea that you could adapt by a need in the environment. People out there in the audience probably incorrectly believe that a dinosaur could make itself change, want to change, and want to learn how to fly. But those ideas that an animal could volitionally change or could adapt to the environment and then pass those changes to the next generation do not work. The only way a dinosaur could become a bird in the theory of evolution is by a series of accidents in the DNA in the reproductive cells. And those accidents would have to be a string of letters, thousands of letters long, that formed by accident. And once you understand this, it's harder and harder and harder to even believe the concept of evolution.
Adaptation would have been a lot easier to believe in before we had DNA, wouldn't it? Before we understood DNA.
Yeah, Darwin was ignorant of DNA. He didn't know how animals changed, and he had these guesses that they could volitionally change.
Right.
But once we figured out DNA, and once we realized that DNA's code was fixed, once you're born, it's fixed, you can't change it, the theory of evolution ran into huge problems.
Charles Darwin suggested that an individual animal could adapt to the environment, but surprisingly, this concept is now considered outdated. For example, a lizard could not grow fur simply because of a sudden cooling of the climate. Even if a skin cell could grow a hair, there's no way for the skin cell to pass this information to the reproductive cells. The reproductive cells, such as the eggs, cannot get signals from the outside environment or signals from the body cells. Because of these difficulties, some biologists have suggested eliminating the concept of direct adaptation altogether. Unfortunately, some naturalists and even university professors still speak in terms of these disproved and outdated mechanisms.
The outside environment is changing, therefore the organism has to adjust to those changes if he wants to survive. And even your DNA is getting signals, your DNA in your egg is getting signals from the outside. And those signals are being translated through stress in your body.
This statement is biologically impossible. There is no way to signal the DNA in the reproductive cells as this scientist suggests. Sometimes when one group of scientists disproves a concept, other scientists continue to promote these false ideas for decades, if not centuries. Another scientific theory born around the time of Aristotle was the law of use and disuse, also called the law of acquired characteristics. Scientists thought that animals could change themselves through effort, and these changes would be passed on to the next generation. Darwin used this law to explain evolution. He believed a species could improve itself through effort, that if an animal exercised and developed large muscles, its offspring would ultimately be born with larger muscles. This idea is not true.
Well, now, modern scientists believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds, and many say that this is one of the best fossil proofs that we have for the theory of evolution. What say you about that?
Just imagine if dinosaurs didn't evolve into birds, just for the sake of discussion. And you were trying to prove that they did. You would have a dinosaur, and then you'd have a bird. How could you make an intermediate? One way you could do that would be to starting to alter the fossils. You could take the dinosaur and start adding feathers to a dinosaur and putting it up in the museums, which they did. Or you could take a bird and try to make it look like a dinosaur and put scales onto a bird, which they did. And I'd like to show you the segment in the show because that's what's going on in the museums right now.
Birds are a diverse group of vertebrates. Most are able to defy gravity and fly. Some are able to swim underwater, while others are incapable of flying or swimming. Evolution scientists believe birds evolved from dinosaurs. They refer to the oldest known fossil bird, Archaeopteryx, as a missing link because of its unique mix of both bird and dinosaur-like features.
Archaeopteryx is a classical example of a connecting links between two high systematic categories, namely the classes of birds and reptiles. Its skeleton is still dinosaur-like, whereas it had already fully developed feathers as the extant birds, and obviously it was capable of powered flight. The existence of such connecting links, that means intermediate stages between large groups of organisms, is a conclusion of Darwin's theory of evolution. And the discovery of the first specimens of Archaeopteryx met the expectations of the Darwinians and had an enormous impact on the scientific community.
Opponents of evolution believe Archaeopteryx was simply a bird. Many museum models portray Archaeopteryx with a scaly dinosaur-like head. Dr. Peter Wellmhofer, one of the world's experts on the evolution of birds, believes these museum models are wrong because scales were not found on the fossils. He contends that Archaeopteryx had a feathered head.
So we can reconstruct a model of Archaeopteryx based on the dimensions of the skeleton and based on the extent of the wing, of the feathers, of the wing and tail.
Okay, that was the real Archaeopteryx, and the theory of Archaeopteryx being a transitional is bogus, and so he goes on to prove that. We're at 6 o'clock almost right now, so we have to cut loose. Next week, we take up some really great videos. It's on the Cambrian explosion. The graphics in this the Cambrian era, are just absolutely amazing. 100 new animals came to life with 19 brand new phylum that suddenly appeared without anything that preceded them in the fossil record. And the graphics that we will show you on that, it's called Darwin's Dilemma, if you want to look it up, YouTube, Darwin's Dilemma. And I hope we see you next week, because we'll also begin work on DNA issues and origin of life problems. And then in the last two sessions that we have, we will begin on the traditional converging evidences. By that time, you will have read all the material on that, so we'll be able to whip through that pretty quickly, and we'll cover a lot of, for instance, C.S. Lewis, and some really neat ways to understand C.S. Lewis in video form also. And so all this video should be helping you. If you're a hardcore skeptic like I used to be, I hope this is very profoundly gives you some really interesting insights. And if you just want this for your own information to be able to give to somebody and help them along at the coffee shop, and you just open up your YouTube and boom, you're showing them videos like this. I can't think of, you don't have to memorize it. There it is for you, the experts speak. Wonderful to see you, and see you next